All right, and welcome everyone to the NRCS Cost Sharing Programs for Urban Farmers webinar. I am Graham Sandersfeld from ISU Extension. I'm with the Urban Ag program as an outreach specialist, working with Dr. Kathleen Dillett on this new Catalyst project. This is our first of a series of webinars, and many of these NRCS programs and incentives presented today are also relevant for all farmers, not just urban or small scale farmers. But we're so happy to host Andrew Thomason as our speaker today. He is the outreach coordinator for the Iowa NRCS. Andrew received his undergraduate in philosophy with a minor in economics from Brandeis University, followed by a master's in strategic communications from Liberty University. He began his career with NRCS in 2020 as a public affairs specialist in South Dakota, writing news releases, success stories, organizing radio spots, and connecting with partners and producers around the state. In spring of this year, Andrew took on the role of outreach coordinator in Iowa to continue to promote NRCS's conservation mission by leading outreach efforts in Iowa. I'll ask that everyone keeps their microphones and cameras off to save bandwidth. And after the presentation, please type your questions in the chat, which you can open by going to the bottom of your Zoom window and clicking on chat. So at the end of the presentation, I will relay the questions to Andrew, and we'll try to hold off until the presentation is finished. After the webinar, a recording will be uploaded to the new ISU Urban Agriculture website, which you can find by just Googling ISU Urban Agriculture. But without further ado, let's say thanks to Andrew for presenting. And if you can now share your screen with us, Andrew, we can start the presentation.
All right. Can everyone hear me all right? Hopefully.
Yeah, you're coming through.
All right. So good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Thomason. As Graham said, I'm the outreach coordinator for Iowa NRCS, and I'm going to be talking about urban and small scale uh, assistance that NRCS can offer to producers. This is going to be a very big picture view. There are obviously going to be finer details on everyone's individual operation, what they actually want to do, their particular goals and everything. But big picture view is good because we want to make it clear what's available and what options there are out there for producers. So some basic objectives. First off, we want to clarify what urban and small scale ag is for USDA, highlight how NRCS can work with urban producers, understand the basic conservation planning process, and a little bit of information on just how to get started with NRCS. So the first question, obviously, is what is urban and small scale ag, and how does NRCS view that? So NRCS and USDA in general doesn't have a strict definition. I'd say it's very broad. And the reason for that, I'll get into a little bit later. But essentially, any operation in an urban setting or suburban setting, or even what's also discussed in this same realm are operations that are just small scale in a town. It doesn't have to be a large urban center like Des Moines or Cedar Rapids. It can also just be in a small town if you have your own small garden or anything of that nature. It's essentially a contrast to the more traditional operations that are larger and that NRCS has traditionally worked with uh, historically within the agency. So after that, we'll go into what does NRCS offer, and we'll go over practices and the technical and financial assistance. And we'll delve into what those exactly mean and how they can benefit urban and small scale producers. So, as I said, I want to discuss why the definition is broad, and a lot of that is outreach. And since I'm the outreach coordinator, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Ultimately, it's about reaching all customers, including underserved customers, and finding those parts of agriculture that NRCS has not necessarily worked with. Agriculture is constantly changing and evolving in a lot of ways, and when it comes to food systems, I think we've even seen recently how expanding food systems at a local level is important. Uh, I think a lot of people realize that, especially during the pandemic, where uh, we had supply chain issues and a whole bunch of other things that disrupted things. But if we had better local food systems, that's something that would be beneficial in those circumstances, so things aren't as challenging for people. And in that regard, we're looking towards those underserved customers who are trying to build those systems in urban areas, in small towns, and not and trying to get cross that bridge where we're serving everyone that we possibly can, and not just servicing the traditional customers that I mentioned previously. And to be clear, this does not mean that we are excluding those people for a new base. It means that we're reaching out to everyone and making sure that we're hitting agriculture wherever it shows up and putting conservation on the ground everywhere. The other part of this also is identifying barriers, trying to figure out the challenges for urban ag, and also helping work with community members, policymakers, etc. And part of doing that to me is important because a lot of times there are different challenges that urban producers face, and by working with those producers and working with in those communities, we can help make urban ag something that's actually viable and not something that's challenging. So I'd like to move on from there to discuss technical assistance. So NRCS is a technical agency. It's very science-based, and I think this is the bread and butter of what NRCS does. NRCS has planners who go out to various operations, and they try to achieve the goals of that operation while addressing resource concerns. So to put it in perspective, essentially the role of NRCS is to help people help the land, as our motto often is said. We want to address those resource concerns and help keep people producing because, as I said, developing those food systems is important. And as the population continues to grow up, we're going to need those. So, NRCS technical staff can assist with many concerns from soil health to irrigation, nutrient management, and I'll go over a few of those different practices later. And I will mention it will not be an exhaustive list. There's a lot of things that we can discuss, but I wanted to have a few so people have an idea of what's available. The other part about that is the financial assistance. So, understandably, a lot of these conservation practices are challenging, especially for newer producers and producers that have been underserved. And in certain settings, it is also challenging because of regulations and other things that could increase costs and whatever the case may be. So NRCS does have financial assistance to help producers achieve their goal and address the resource concerns. And this isn't dependent on the scale of your operation. We can provide assistance to all different types of operations. As I said, it always goes back to that outreach piece for me, and it's that we're trying to reach every single customer. And as I said before, this does not exclude any operation. We're just trying to include those operations that were previously excluded. Um, or not served quite as well as the traditional ones. So from there, from the discussion of financial assistance, we can move into programs. And the main programs I'd like to talk about today are EQIP and CSP. Now, EQIP's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and CSP is the Conservation Stewardship Program. Both of these are two of the primary programs that we have for working with small scale and urban ag. And I'll go into further discuss them and the application periods and how that entire process works. So, to be clear, we do accept applications year round. However, there are particular periods where they are funded, and if your application comes in during that period, you can get funded in that year, but there may be a little bit of time delay if it's funded outside of that period. And we can go over those particular dates. I believe for this year was November 22nd. So and there will likely be another period in the future, or of course there will be. So we'll get there. So as I said, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program is pretty much our flagship program. It's eligible to conventional and organic producers who own and rent agricultural land. And essentially, the main process is you develop a conservation to address the resource concerns you see. And as I said, we'll go over some of those concerns and some of those practices that help address it. And NRCS will provide technical and financial assistance to producers to address those natural resource concerns for environmental benefit. Is that's really the bread and butter thing. One of the more important things for the agency is that we are addressing resource concerns to conserve those natural resources so you can keep producing into the future. That's really what we want. We want producers to continually be able to produce going into the future and help develop those food systems, especially in our urban and small scale environments. Conservation Stewardship Program. I like to think of the stewardship program as it's not EQIP, it's not the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, but what it does is that it supports producers who are already on their way a little bit. Uh, and one of the important things that was changed is that the minimum payment for small scale was up to 4,000 recently, which is a boon for small scale producers who often have challenges when it comes to financial stability, especially when they're getting started. It's definitely a challenge. Shuffling my notes a little bit. So there are several practices that NRCS used to support urban and small scale, and I'll go through a few of them in this presentation. Notably, we have micro irrigation, pest management, mulching, high tunnels, low tunnels, nutrient management, raised beds, organic management, and there are more. I didn't want to create too exhaustive of a list because we could be here for a while, and I have an hour and I'm probably zooming through it, but at the same time, I wanted to go over a few of these practices to just get it out there what NRCS can help with and just give you a sort of an idea of things that you could perhaps use on your own operation if you're so inclined. So one of the challenges that I've heard oftentimes, especially in urban and other small scale environments, it's the challenge of managing water resources. And a micro irrigation system can help out with that. It'll help provide water efficiently so you're not paying as much and and also get your plants the water they need in order to survive. Um, One of the main requirements is that the land has to have been irrigated in 2 of the last 5 years, which is very broad. If you're watering by hand, that also counts as irrigation. And those things are things that are pretty easy to navigate if you already have your operation kind of established to some extent. You have to have been irrigating in some way, so it's a very doable thing. And I suppose I should also mention the water must be obtained legally, but I think most people have that most people would understand that or have that caveat understood. Another one of the larger challenges that I've heard about for urban producers is pest management. Especially, there have been challenges I know for a lot of organic operations with managing pests. So, pest management conservation system combines the integrated pest management principle, utilizing sound prevention, avoidance, monitoring, and suppression strategies with conservation practice to minimize risk to the environment from pest management activities. So the goal of this, reduce pest pressure, retain beneficial organisms, because as we all know, this is a big system and you don't want to disrupt the good parts of the system while uh, while taking on the negative parts of it. And the NRCS can also assist with making sure that whatever strategies are put into place are not ones that have environmental damages elsewhere. At least that's the goal. Because, like I said, we want to address resource concerns and preserve natural resources so that going into the future, you can continue your operation without as much difficulty. And NRCS can help with some financial assistance and technical assistance with those activities. Mulching is another common practice that's often discussed. Essentially, plant residues or other materials applied to the soil surface. It's mostly to improve irrigation, water use efficiency, maintain soil moisture, weed suppression, plant productivity and health, and helps maintain or increase soil organic matter, which is one of the challenges, especially in urban areas. Sometimes, depending on where your ground is, you may not have the soil with the highest soil organic matter. So there are definitely challenges that mulching can help address. And as I said with the previous practices, many of our technical specialists can help out and develop a plan that will get you to where you want to be in that regard. Another popular practice that we have a initiative for, high tunnels. In high tunnels, especially in a climate like Iowa, where we do have our winter, stints the cropping season and improves plant health by having sort of an environment for the plants that's not quite just out in the open. And through the equip program, NRCS will help pay for the purchase of a high tunnel kit. This also can protect against pests and other environmental challenges that are out there. So it is one of the more popular things I've seen, and oftentimes that fund pool is very active. Similar to high tunnels, we have low tunnels. Those protect crops from pests, weather, other concerns. NRCS planners can help with the installation. Height cannot exceed 4 feet and can also be used in conjunction with high tunnels. And they have a similar objective. It's to prevent pests, help protect the plants, help keep them healthy, and make it a little bit more viable to farm in some of these urban and small scale situations. Nutrient management is another practice that's rather important. As I mentioned previously, sometimes soil organic matter content and soil health are a bit challenging in some of these small scale or urban areas. A lot of that land has been used for other things and not necessarily things that help with nutrient cycling and all those things. So NRCS can assist with nutrient management to limit offsite nutrient losses while optimizing plant productivity and health in addition to improving or maintaining soil organic matter. And like I said, this is important because oftentimes in some of these scenarios, these are some of the things that can limit the development of an urban or small scale farm. All right, so moving on to raised beds. Raised beds, they create an environment above the ground. As you can see in those pictures, there is sort of a ground there, but the beds provide a little bit more lift to it. So they're not directly on the ground, and it's applicable in areas where the soil conditions aren't necessarily ideal if there have been contaminants. And as I said previously, in some of these urban scenarios, there have been heavy metals or other contaminants that have created a less than ideal soil condition for various crops for growing various crops. And in that case, raised beds could be an option to help alleviate that and make it so the area is usable for growing despite the challenges. Would like to mention though, when it comes to if you're going for an organic operation, those heavy metals and other contaminants that are in the area could pose a risk to that as well. So just keep that in mind with this practice is that if you're going for organic, um, having those contaminants in the area could and probably would put at risk your organic um, certification. So just keep that in mind. I also want to talk about organic management. Speaking of organic, so organic management, the practice itself is about improving natural resources on land in and adjacent to organic production using methods which integrate cultural, biological, and mechanical practices that foster cycling of resources, promote ecological balance, and conserve biodiversity. So this has to adhere to USDA's National Organic Program, which uses land-grant university nutrient recommendation and control erosion to tolerable T levels. So that land-grant university nutrient recommendation is important. I would actually consult the ISU Organic Lab for a lot of these recommendations. They would have a lot of the information on that as well. Speaking of, we also, through the Organic Transition Initiative and Organic Initiative, we have financial assistance to specifically for organic operations. So if you're transitioning to organic, you'll have to set up an organic management plan and have specific things laid out. So you become an organic operation and you have to maintain it to those National Organic Program standards. Checking my notes real quick to make sure I have the numbers right. So the National Organic Initiative is limited to no more than 140,000 over the 2018 Farm Bill years, 2019 through 2023. We're in a continuing resolution, so that would apply in that case. And under general equip, it is up to the normal 450,000. So just want to make sure that's clear because there are a couple of different organic initiatives. One is national, one is through the EQIP program. And In addition to that, I'd also like to mention the AMS, the Agricultural Marketing Service Transition to Organic Partnership Program. It invests up to 100 million over 5 years in cooperative agreements with nonprofit organizations who support transitioning. They help provide technical assistance and wraparound support for transitioning and existing organic farmers. So the AMS is building partnership networks in 6 regions across the United States with trust organizations, and they do direct farmer trainings, education, outreach, and they also help mentor farmers who are new to organic, which is important because when you're working through those things, it is always good to have support, and we'll work with our AMS folks across the aisle to ensure that producers are getting the adequate support that they need. Okay. I'd also like to mention that Iowa NRCS has an agreement to provide one training a year over 4 years through the top program as well. So there is also that going on as well. So I'd like to briefly discuss the NRCS planning process. And I believe this is important because oftentimes one of the challenges that we have um, with people just coming in or some phone calls I've had is that some people expect things to be instantaneous or fast, and there is a process because we want to ensure that everyone's on the same page. So there's a 9-step planning process, and I'll briefly go over each part of it. Um, and that process helps make sure that the goals of the producer is aligned with addressing the resource concerns that are identified on their operation. So the first step is identifying problems and opportunities. So figuring out what the resource concern, figuring out what the resource concerns are, different things that can be done. Determine objectives. Figure out what are the objectives that are looking for. What are the things that you want to accomplish on your operation? That's number two. Inventory resources, figure out what you have on your operation already, what's there. Develop the plan from there. Four is analyze resource data. So figuring out what the existing conditions for all the identified resources, limitations, potentials for the desired use. Once you've done all that, you're formulating alternatives, you're coming up with different ideas and trying to figure out what the best plan uh, for the producer is, at least on the NRCS side, and the producer is part of this process completely. We're working together to figure out what the best thing is. You evaluate those alternatives. So we're going through all the different options and saying this is good, and maybe this isn't what I'm looking to do. Then point seven, you make some decisions. You figure out what the preferences are. Like what do you want to do with your operation? Number eight, you implement the plan. The NRCS planner will provide detailed practice implementation information, make sure that they have what they need to actually implement the plan. And then the last step is to evaluate the plan because we don't want to just toss something out there and let it go. We want to make sure that there is some level of a follow-up. So stay in touch, make sure everything's going well, and then figure out if something didn't go well to evaluate it and make course changes as necessary. Just come back, follow up. So that's the main planning process. And what's important about that is that we ensure that everyone's on the same page and everyone agrees with what's going on. And ultimately, NRCS is a producer-driven agency. We work with people to help implement conservation and reach their goals. It's all voluntary. There's nothing forced or anything like that. It's it's our technical experts working with producers to get conservation on the ground. And this process is how it's done. So how do you apply? So the first step usually is reaching out to your local service center. Um, we have service centers in every single county, and essentially we can we can be reached pretty much everywhere. Obviously, there are hours of operation, but with with service centers in every single county, there's always one that's fairly nearby. And then from there, you go through the planning process. You evaluate that you figure out what you want to do, you figure out your goals, what your resources are. Then you fill out your application. You check for eligibility, which most of that is fairly straightforward. We can go into eligibility a bit more uh, in a second, but essentially, a lot of it is, do you own the land? Are you a citizen? And so on. Then you go through the ranking process, which is, uh, as I mentioned, there are selected contracts within a range of dates. That's what that process is. If your contract gets selected, then you go to step 5, which is implementing the plan. So I also wanted to bring up a few other pieces of assistance that USDA has. I figure that's also important as well. The Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Production, they have many grants. So if you're doing something innovative or a bit unique, especially in urban settings, there's quite a bit of that. There are grant opportunities through the Office of Urban Ag and Innovative Production. Farmers.gov is a good place to start for a lot of things. One of the things you'll need is a farm number, and FSA can help out with that, and going on farmers.gov will give you resources. And I also should mention that NRCS and FSA offices are usually in the same location, and it's usually when you go in to work with NRCS, if you need your farm number and some of those other documents, you just go right across the hall and work with FSA to get those, and they will help you out. We're a family in that sort of sense. We work together for a lot of these things. There are also urban service centers around the country. There is not one in Iowa, at least not yet, but there are urban service centers. The two closest ones to here are in Chicago and Minneapolis. So depending on where you're located, that could also be an option to take a look at those. I also want to link getting started with NRCS. There's quite a bit more detail than what I've presented here on actually getting started with NRCS. And I also want to link our page for urban ag and our pages for the organic programs and the organic initiative that we have in Iowa. Those are all uh, interesting links that can specifically go into a little bit more detail than what we've gone into here and talk about the nuances of those particular programs and different things that NRCS can help with. And the organic programs at a glance, it goes through all the different programs we have for organic in particular. I do know that a lot of urban and small scale producers are working towards being organic, and those will have additional programs in addition to the ones I've mentioned here, because NRCS and FSA have programs, but there are also other programs through other USDA agencies. So with that, I can open it up to some questions. I think we have a good 20 or so minutes left, so put my contact information up there if anyone would like to reach out to me. But should be good for questions.
All right, thank you, Andrew. We'll go to questions. I will go through questions in the order that we received them. We have quite a bit of time, over 25 or 24 minutes rather. So don't worry really about your question being skipped because I think we should have a good amount of time to cover everyone. But the first question was, I think, kind of about eligibility. They were asking, it's confusing when a farmer tenant enrolls versus a landowner applying for funding. Can you please walk us through this or kind of elaborate on that? Oh, you're still muted.
Sorry about that. Generally, when there's a renting situation, what you need is proof that you have control of the land, and the landowner has to sign off on it as well. Usually, there's some situation like that. That can be a challenge depending on the particular circumstances of what's going on. But usually, that's what happens. The person who has control of the land, who's renting it, has to get the the sign off from the actual owner.
Thank you. Next question was, could you please provide us like with the range of compensation or payments that could be given for doing some of these practices, like for instance, low tunnels?
Okay. I'll have to actually consult the payment schedule, but low tunnels in particular are paid by the square feet, I believe. So let me find that. Yeah, and the practice unit is square feet, and if you're having a low tunnel, for example, that is less than 1,000 square feet through Equip, it's $4.55 with the unit being square feet. So it depends on the actual size of the low tunnel itself. I would also like to mention that if you're curious about any of these payment scenarios, they are all on the website, and I can link that someplace or have that link someplace afterwards, but they are on the website. And also, the other thing I should mention, low tunnel management is also paid at 41 cents per square foot as well. It's by area of the actual tunnel as well.
Thank you. If anyone's curious, I think I found the right page that has the payment schedules for Iowa. They vary by state, um, but it's a big PDF that basically has the metrics that they measure these payments by, and then the amount paid for each unit.
It's a bit unwieldy, I'll
Yeah,
admit.
because there's a lot of these things are you need to find a way to measure them, or they're measured by an index. So it's worth exploring those details. Um, Someone asked, there's an FSA office in every county in Iowa. Is that true in other states?
Generally, yes. I know there's probably an exception out there that I'm not quite aware of, but FSA and NRCS offices are usually in the same offices and they are quite often, they're usually in every single county. And we do also, I should also mention, we have a service center locator on the website. So if you're not sure where your service center is on the website, on the front page, you can pretty easily find it. The service center locator, just put in your county and it will put the service center that is associated with that county.
And I just pasted that link for the Find Your Local Service Center. Um, we had a question about the time frame for payment. So, like, if someone applied now, which is kind of after a batching window of funding has passed, do you have an idea of like when they might receive funding, assuming everything went smoothly? For instance, if they were implementing high tunnels, um, when would they see that money for implementing those?
So yeah, assuming everything went well, it would be with it would the next it would be within that next funding window, which I don't think I want to say I don't think we've announced another one quite yet. I know that'll be at some point, but I don't think that's happened quite yet. But it can be an amount of time just because going through the entire process. And it's a long planning process, but as I said, it's to ensure that everyone's on the same page and we're making sure that we're reaching those goals that you're wanting to reach. So it can be a decent amount of time, but it would be within that next funding period would be when the contract would go through, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah. Um, so I think revisiting an earlier question, we had a follow-up asking so about the tenant versus landowner situation. Um, if a landowner never officially signed off or signs off on a tenant applying for these programs, does that mean the tenant would basically never be able to get assistance?
At least from my understanding, you have to show that you control the land. That is part of it because if we can't implement something on land that you don't have control of to some extent. So you'd have to have that deed or title to it and the rental contract and everything. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Um, do you have any idea or estimate of how many applicants there were for um, cost sharing for urban practices in the past few years, or any idea about how to gauge interest or these numbers?
I I will admit I do not have that offhand. I can get that, but it would have to be afterwards. But I do know we can get some of that information. I just don't have it offhand right now.
Thank you. And I will say, if there's any questions that we can't answer right now because they might require a little more research or we don't get to it in time, then we can send a follow-up email to all of the registrants for this webinar with the questions and answers that we didn't get to. All right, we still have 15 minutes, so if you had any questions about um, anything NRCS related or anything that Andrew covered, now's the time to ask.
And feel free to reach out afterwards if because I know for me questions oftentimes come up later rather than in the moment. So feel free to reach out. My email's always open and I try to be quick at responding. I try to be pretty quick at responding.
I will revisit just what uh, on behalf of the ISU Organic Lab because we work with a lot of or we're involved with the Midwest Transition to Organic Partnership Program. Um, this is a really great program for people who want personal assistance because interested farmers who are exploring transitioning to organic will be paired with a mentor. Um, and if you are someone who practices organic, you could become a mentor and you could be paid for that work. We did have a question come in asking if there's any specific plans for orchardists or nut growers or value-added product producers.
I say that again. What was the
Do you have any programs specifically for orchardists, for people who run an orchard, um, or grow
okay?
nuts or value-added product producers?
Our programs are fairly broad. It depends on, and I said this at the beginning, it depends on what resource concerns you're looking to address. So generally, I would say yes. It depends on what you're looking to address, though. So if say you have an issue with pests in your orchard or whatever, that would be something that NRCS would be able to tackle. So it's less depending on the type of operation and more depending on the resource concerns you're looking to address, I'd say.
I guess I have one. So generally, like you said earlier, you do have to have field agents kind of come out and check out your operation, um, get a sense of what resources you have a concern about. How or what's the availability of the average field agent? Like, say you wanted help, or you just wanted someone to come out to get a measurement on like a raised bed because they need to do that to follow the practice standard. Um, are local field agents generally pretty available? Like, how far out do you think they'd have to schedule something?
That is a tough question because I do not work in every field office. That's what makes it a bit of a challenging question. It somewhat depends on the field office, but the hope is that there's always someone available, but that's not always going to be the case. I th it that's going to depend heavily on the individual office, I think. But the hope is that there's someone available, and I know we have staff all over the state that work hard to make sure that they're getting to every customer. Obviously, it's not always possible, but a lot of I the other thing I'll say is that I do know a lot of folks want to get out of the office because they don't want to be in there anyway. They'd rather be out in the field doing things. So, but yeah, that varies depending on the office itself. Some are more busy than others.
Um, this is like the last call for any questions that you all might have. If there's none left, then we could probably end the webinar early, but we can still put them in the chat, and we have 12 minutes left that we could still answer any remaining questions. And to repeat, this webinar, a recorded file of this webinar, will be uploaded to our new ISU Urban Ag website, which I will find a link for. One sec. This is a new website that we launched just about a month ago. It's supposed to be the main resource for ISU Extension, all things urban ag, events, resources. You can learn about our partner farms that we're working with in this project, and of course, see the resources related to webinars. We are hoping to host or our plan for the next webinar is going to be for January 28th at 1 p.m. So mark your calendar. Um, that's going to be about marketing strategies for urban ag. Um, and that'll be presented by Schaefer Ridgway. He runs Southern Goods, a small farm in Waterloo. All right, so if that's all everyone has to ask, then we can conclude this webinar. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Andrew, for speaking and being available for any questions people have. You can contact Andrew with the contact information he shared. But yeah, thank you all for attending.